Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. My guest today is Doug Holtz-Eakin. Doug, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You're now president of the American Action Forum.
Yes.
Among many other things. Of course, my familiarity with you is when you were the director of the Congressional Budget Office.
Yes.
So, I actually would like to get your take on, since you were in Washington, since you were there, how's Washington changed, in your opinion?
I think everyone notes the partisanship, which is real. But I think the biggest difference is since about 2001, and I worked for then President George W. Bush for 2 years, so I say this lovingly, since 2001, we haven't seen a president who really knows how to use the Congress, who can offer up a piece of legislation and say, this is in the nation's interest, needs to be done, send the legislation to Congress, and thereby give them no excuse for not doing it. Go to the opposite side and say, we know it's important to you, we'll make sure the things that matter are going to be in the final draft. Go to their own side and say, we get it, it's a bad vote, we'll raise money for you, whatever they have to do, and essentially get something through the process in that way. Just the mechanics of running Washington, they seem to have lost the manual, and that's a problem.
So certainly legislation does get passed, but are you saying you're seeing administrations more who articulate a more generic policy and really leave it to Congress to do the bill writing?
Absolutely. We saw President Bush win re-election saying he wanted to do Social Security reform, but he didn't send up a specific piece of legislation, say this is what I want. It never happened. He didn't even get a vote. President Obama let the Congress write the Affordable Care Act. President Trump let the Congress write his health care reform. It didn't pass. And increasingly, the big things that get done are done solely on a partisan basis using special procedures. That's a big change.
So, years ago, and it wasn't that many years ago, there seemed to be a real emphasis on and significant discussion about federal deficits, about the national debt, the Simpson-Bowles Commission coming forward with a majority, but not a supermajority of recommendations, and really a set of kind of compromise recommendations that seem to give us the opportunity to move the country in a different direction financially. Yet you had the Republican Congress totally disinterested in moving forward. You had President Obama not taking any action except, I'm aware he thanked Al and Erskine.
For their efforts, yes.
Right, but beyond...
I think they wanted more.
yeah, to put it mildly. But beyond that, he didn't do anything either. What's going on and why does there seem to be, on both sides of the aisle, this lack of concern?
Well, it troubles me to say the least, given my background. I care a lot about these issues, and I think we're missing an opportunity to fix our key social safety nets, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, for the 21st century. And that in and of itself is a loss. We should have seniors and we have low-income Americans who should have better programs. And that's the key. Now, to get better programs, you have to reform them, and that's how we fix the deficit. I think right now no one's being punished for not doing it. They're not being punished by voters. They're getting reelected. Not being punished by financial markets. Right? In the late 90s, it was famous that the bond market was going to show up and take care of things if the administration didn't. That's not going on right now. Around the world, there are large deficits, and markets have come to accept them.
Well, and of course, I think something that's coming into favor is MMT, modern monetary theory. Talk about your perspective on that.
I think it's badly mistaken. The notion is somehow that a government that can borrow in its own sovereign currency will never default. That's technically true, but the way they don't default is they print the money and pay off the obligation. Historically, that's been a route to inflation, people fleeing a currency, and so while there may not be a default, there will be bad economic consequences to trying to do that.
So certainly one of them is almost what we're seeing now. I mean, we have an economy for the last several years that's been doing very well. Employment numbers have been wonderful, especially if you're looking for a job. Yet now we're running huge deficits at a time where the reverse should be happening. What's wrong with what's happening today?
Well, I think it's related to one of the things that we talked about earlier, which is how has Washington changed? It doesn't know how to do big things. The deficit is a big problem. It's $900 billion this year. It'll be $1 trillion as far as the eye can see. Getting your arms around us every year. And the debt compared to the size of our economy, debt to GDP, right now about 74%, headed for 100% within 10 years and then beyond, just ramping up like never before seen in peacetime. That's a large challenge. So it requires great leadership to get it done. That means the President of the United States has to run for office saying, that's important, we're going to take care of it, get a mandate to do something about it, and then run the machinery of Washington effectively to get the bill done. And there's been no interest in anyone doing that. I have seen no interest at all.
And there's certainly elected officials, candidates as well, don't see any pressure from voters to take those issues head on.
Yeah, and I get asked all the time, oh, when's the crisis? When are they going to be forced to do something? And I think a lot of people have the image that the way this gets resolved is you have a Greece or Portugal style meltdown, rioting in the streets, and the Congress comes to grips. Let us pray not. That's not a good way to solve this, and I don't think it is the future. The bigger problem is it's like ants in the woodwork. Every dollar that we're borrowing is a dollar that could have been used productively somewhere else in this economy, or we're borrowing it from a foreign entity, and so when something productive is done with it, they get the proceeds. These are missed opportunities for people who want to have greater prosperity, and everyone wants that. Someone needs to make that case. We're better off if we take care of this.
So I think one of the interesting aspects of this is when the federal government was investing, as it were, in the country to get us out of the recession. You had the American Recovery Act, which is roughly, what, $800 billion. You had, of course, under George Bush, who started the effort to bail out a number of companies. That was another $700 billion. And there was a lot of concern. I was one of the people who was concerned that even those investments, however necessary one might argue, could really lead to significant inflation and increases in interest rates. That didn't happen, and you have a Fed that's really kept interest rates down very low. Yeah. I think a lot of people today assume that the Fed can do this indefinitely. Can it?
I don't know. I'm among those who famously signed a letter expressing concern about the fiscal policies and especially the quantitative easing and the sustained purchase of government assets by the Fed. And I thought this would be highly inflationary at some point. It might still be. It's not yet, and it's been a long time. I think there's a bit of a mystery out there about the inflation process. And one of the things that I know about it is that if you look at services inflation, so you provide services, interviews with people like me, I hope they're valued by people. Services inflation is just like what the Fed wants it to be. Since about 2009, it's been 2.2 to 2.6%, right in their comfort zone, exactly what they hope for. It's the goods market, and goods are more internationally traded, and they are more, as a result, influenced by other monetary policies, and goods prices have been in absolute deflation for a number of years, and now they bounce up and down. That's the issue in the inflation process. It's not obvious to me our Fed controls it all that well, and they're struggling to get their arms around what it looks like to do this in the 21st century.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Certainly, there's an argument that while the economy is doing so well, with the Fed having cut interest rates to address the challenge of the recession, the last couple years have been, and even today, this is the opportunity to raise rates so that when you enter another recession, which all of us assume will happen at some point, you have some leeway, you have some cushion, some room to lower rates. The Fed's not doing that, and you have a president who, of course, is putting as much pressure as he can on the Fed to lower rates. What's your take on that?
Well, if you go back to the second quarter of 2016, that's the recent low point in growth. And since then, quarter after quarter, the growth rate has ramped up. Year over year, we got up to 3.2%, a tremendous accomplishment. That, I think, largely came from tax cuts and reforms, deregulatory policies of the administration. Those are core pieces of sort of sound economic policy for growth. It really worked. And the Fed moved upwards continuously during that period. It was all fine. Then we started getting sort of the trade wars and the sort of threats on Mexico. Now we have threats on Vietnam, and China is a continual issue. Could be auto tariffs tomorrow. And that jolted people's confidence. There's also government shutdown, jolted people's confidence. Household sectors sort of wobbled a little bit in ways that no one expected. And I think that the Fed had to recognize that and sort of stop raising. But had none of that happened, I think they would have raised again in 2019. No question about it.
So Bond King, I guess Jeffrey is at Grunlock, has predicted that we're going to look in a relatively short period of time of interest rates jumping to like 6%, which of course with the size of our national debt would have ramifications in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Do you think that prediction has any value?
You have to tell me why it's going to go to 6%. And I don't see the inflation driving it to 6%. I don't see a genuine threat of a sovereign default by the United States driving up, sort of international demands for interest rates in the U.S. So no, I don't think I worry about that very much. I do worry about the sensitivity of the budget to interest. It's really sort of creeped in there, and I don't think people quite realize that if we continue on autopilot the way we seemingly are, no one's changing anything, interest will be the third largest department of the government by 10 years from now. It'll be bigger than the Pentagon, it'll be bigger than the Department of Education, you name it. It's going to be smaller than Social Security and Medicare. That's it.
I got to tell you, voters don't seem to care about that. Is that going to change?
I think they just don't know.
Right.
So here's my personal theory, which is for 8 years, President Obama told the American people there is nothing wrong with the federal budget that can't be fixed by taxing rich people. And for the past 2.5 years, President Trump has told them there's nothing wrong with the federal budget. He doesn't even mention it. So why should they worry? The people who are their leaders, who they have given the authority to take care of this country, don't mention it as a problem. So I think they are blissfully unaware that this is going on. At some point, they're going to care, and the sooner we educate them about what's on the table, the better.
So I want to talk just briefly about corporate debt, that there are some concerns that I think there was a Morgan Stanley report that is claiming that as much as 45% of corporate debt could be classified as junk bonds. What are your concerns, if any, about corporate debt in America?
The Fed has singled out so-called leverage lending, this particular corporate debt, as the concern of the moment in financial markets. They've done it twice. They've sent Fed representatives to the leverage lending conference. I happened to be there. They showed up to say, we're worried about you guys. Please don't get carried away. I think if you step back from the Fed's concern, this is symptomatic of this fear that there's going to be the next bubble, and that's how we're going to get the next crisis. We had dot-com, bubble burst, recession. We have the big credit bubble, housing bubble in particular, subprime mortgages burst, huge crisis. And so I think people expect that to be the way the next recession starts. The trouble is that's the exception, not the rule. We could go back to having good old 20th century style recessions where incomes simply drop, people get laid off without a big financial market jolt. And so I think we should look at more than just asset classes in terms of our worry list.
So I want to talk about the dollar for a little bit. The U.S. has been kind of weaponizing the dollar, as it were, with its use against different countries, Iran in particular. Is this a good strategy in the long run to use the dollar in that manner, or are you concerned that if we continue to use the dollar in that manner, that that will create such a great incentive for other countries, and in fact other countries have been saying, let's look at another currency. What would that mean for the U.S.?
The fact that the dollar is the reserve currency, and that's not a global agreement, it just turned out that way, gives us a lot of latitude. We can, in fact, run bigger deficits, have more debt, because people are willing to hold the treasuries as their dollar-denominated holdings. So that's whether we deserve that extra rope or not, we've got it, and we may or may not use it wisely. I think to give that up is a loss for the U.S. It's a loss for the global economy. it's cheaper to have all these transactions in the same currency. You start swapping different currencies, you have to worry about currency risk, and none of it will work as well. So it's a loss to move away from it. So do the tactics make sense? In some cases, yes. I think we saw post-September 11th, 2001, the Treasury's efforts at terrorist financing and policing those financial transactions in dollars more carefully as a beneficial thing. In other circumstances, I'm not convinced. Threatening tariffs against Mexico because of immigration issues, things unrelated to commercial transactions, I think gets us too far afield and probably will damage the dollar.
With one of the issues that has been going on a long time is certainly the manipulation of currency by China. Where are we with that?
China manipulated its currency, kept it artificially low. It stopped. And so the concern should have stopped, but it hasn't. So that's my problem with that one narrowly. The larger problem is if we get into this game of pointing fingers about currency manipulation, fingers will be pointed back at the United States. And the reality is that if the Fed cuts interest rates, it affects the currency. If it raises interest rates, it affects the currency. If we do tax reform, it affects the currency. And you could then put your entire domestic agenda at hostage to accusations of currency manipulation. I think everyone needs to stand down on this front.
How about competitiveness? Is there any federal agency that studies competitiveness in terms of in the U.S. vis-a-vis other countries and goes to leadership and say, hey, here's what Canada's doing or here's what Germany's doing. Should we take a look at that?
So there's nobody who does that, but everybody does that. The Department of Commerce puts out competitiveness reports. The Council of Economic Advisors in the White House will do that. Certainly Treasury will think about it. If you step back, the most important thing about competitiveness is your productivity. Can you do more with less, and as a result, charge less or reap more profit, whatever it might be? And productivity is something that we know some elements of it. You should have good basic research, and I think we're underfunding that. You should have good patent protections and innovation environment. Those cut across a lot of agencies. So I think competitiveness is absolutely a crucial issue, but it's going to be something where you're going to have the White House keep their eye on it and coordinate other people's activities.
How about healthcare internationally as a variable in competitiveness? Talk about that.
It's one of the sad tales of my life that once you go to the CBO, you become a health economist. There's no way around it because all the dollars go through the federal health programs. And if you think about that, we do spend a lot, and we increasingly spend more per person than other countries. We're almost at 20% of GDP in healthcare. That means we have a fifth of our economy that's seriously underperforming. That's not good for competitiveness in and of itself. So good economic policy toward the healthcare sector, like antitrust and things like that, is important. It means that we have to raise taxes to fund all those programs. That typically harms competitiveness. So there are a lot of things that lead to inhibitions on competitiveness out of the healthcare sector.
All right, what's Doug Holtz-Eakin's healthcare solution? What's your prescription?
My prescription is pretty simple. Fix the federal programs. Medicare pays about half the nation's bills. Doctors, hospitals, device companies, pharmaceutical companies, they pursue the rewards of the federal dollar. So the incentives you set up in those programs are going to drive the way we practice medicine. And we had really bad incentives. For a long time, doctors were paid, quote, fee for service. The more they did, the more they got paid. So that's a recipe to do a lot of things. Hospitals were reimbursed a fixed amount for a diagnosis, and that's a recipe to do as little as possible and just take the money. Doctors practice in hospitals. We have a healthcare system that is fundamentally schizophrenic and delivers bad care. So we need to fix that. That's the starting point. And I think the best way to do it is through these Medicare Advantage plans that are inside of Medicare. They're different all across the country because the population is different, the diseases are different. They can tailor it to their location. Getting the incentives right in Medicare Advantage would be a big start. So I'd start there. Medicare Advantage also is on a budget, so you get it on a budget, don't promise so much. If you promise people an open-ended amount of money, they'll take it eventually, and the healthcare sector has. It's time to put it on a budget.
So what do we do about people who don't have health insurance today?
We need to cover them. I think, I'm a Republican. I know this is probably not a purely political show, but it's a mistake for the Republican Party to oppose coverage. I find this mystifying. So we should all be in favor of covering every American, and we should simply have a disagreement about better ways to do it. And right now, I think it would make a lot of sense to have a catastrophic plan that's available cheaply to any American to make sure there's at least a minimal amount of coverage.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
All right, I want to jump to the value-added tax. Our competitors have a value-added tax. That means they tax products there, but when they ship them to us, those manufacturers get a credit for that tax.
Yes.
And so it's a tremendous advantage to them from just an economic marketplace perspective. Why don't we have a value-added tax, and should?
So the mechanism you described, which is if a U.S. Producer sells into Europe, the tax is added to that import in Europe. If the European producer sells it in the United States, the tax is removed from that export. That's known as border adjustment. At the beginning of the tax reform effort, the House Republicans had a blueprint which included something called border adjustment. You may or may not have noticed it got pilloried and was got its own name, which is border adjustment tax, which it's not. It's a mechanism within another tax system, value-added tax typically, and it's a very sensible mechanism. It puts everything on a level playing field. If something's made here or made abroad, they pay the same tax. And so I found that one of the really disappointing moments where I, as a policy person, realized I'm out of touch with the politics. I thought this is a no-brainer, we should do this. It got killed. We still need to get back and do it. We are really not as badly out of line as we used to be because we've cut the corporate rate, but our business tax systems are not as good as other countries, and that hurts our workers because we have to compete there.
So why can't we get that done? I mean, I know Democrats, I think, consider a value-added tax regressive, and Republicans consider a value-added tax a tax. And if you've signed Grover Norquist's pledge, and Grover's been a guest on the show a couple of times, you don't want to be accused of, hey, you broke your promise. How do we get around those two challenges?
So the famous line is that Democrats oppose a VAT because it's regressive, and Republicans oppose it because it's a money machine. And we'll get one when the Republicans realize it's regressive and the Democrats realize it's a money machine. That's been the wisdom on the value-added tax for a long time. I don't think we're going to get a value-added tax. I think the politics of adding a new tax to the system, that's just too big a lift. So one of the reasons I liked the House Republicans' proposal at the beginning of tax reform is it basically took the existing tax system and rejiggered it to be a value-added tax in disguise. We didn't call it one, so no one got all that excited about it, but the base really looked like a value-added tax base. The collection was done like that. The border adjustment could have made it work like a value-added tax. That's still feasible. We need to get something like that done.
All right, immigration. What are the economic implications or ramifications of the president's immigration policies?
They're unambiguously negative. There is probably no more underutilized tool of economic policy than immigration. Here are the key insights. The native-born population in the United States has sub-replacement fertility, which is a fancy way of saying you and I don't have enough kids to even keep the population size constant. It's been true for a long time. It's actually declined even further recently. That means that all population growth in the United States, all labor force growth in the United States, is due to our immigration decisions. Our entire future will be dictated by our immigration decisions. And so to take a stance of being against immigrants and to try to reduce immigration is to take a stance against America's future. The most important reforms we could do would be those that fixed a system which I think everyone agrees is not working very well. It was founded on two principles, family unification and humanitarian goals like refugees and asylees. Only 5% of visas are granted for purely economic reasons at the moment. And we have places like Canada and Australia who have reformed their systems to focus on economics. I think we should do that. We should take advantage of that opportunity, bring people who want to work and have the skills to work to the United States. If they're trying to come anyway, why don't we build on that and grow more rapidly and have a better economy? That That's the most important thing. On my list of things you could do, that'd be number one. That way we will collect the same amount of money. We don't make any big spending promises we can't afford, and we get the mitigation incentives we need. That's the key.
All right, last question. I know we're running out of time. Income inequality, what's the challenge, and what are your concerns, if any, about the gap, the growing gap between the bottom and the top in America?
So I'm in this minority of folks who doesn't like the conversation about income inequality, and here's why. No one can tell me the right amount of inequality. And if we don't know what we're trying to get to, we don't have a policy, we just have a wish. And if you just have a wish, you're really not going to do anything. So I think this whole thing has been terribly misleading and ineffective. The one part that everyone can agree on in the inequality debate is we don't like poor people. So I think we should focus very hard on the fact that we have poor people, and we have people who are not economically self-sufficient. They do not have the skills to feed themselves, house themselves. That's a clear national failure and something that everyone should agree should be addressed. Worrying about the rich people, we just fight about them. So let's not do that for a moment, and let's take care of poor people. And the heart of that's going to be fixing our K-12 education system, where a quarter to a third of 4th and 8th graders right now cannot read or do math at all near their grade level. They are seriously deficient. We're creating an underclass for the future, and I think that's a national problem. That should be the conversation.
All right. I want to conclude on a question on leadership, but one area that I didn't ask you that you have great expertise in that I don't hear anybody talking about is the Department of Defense budget. When you look at the Department of Defense budget, as you did at the CBO, you look at the nuclear program and the Department of Energy on behalf of the military, and you look at the Veterans Administration. I mean, you're looking at $1 trillion a year we're spending. Republicans think we should spend more. Democrats are too scared to say we should spend less. What kind of efficiency could we get in DOD, and what kind of savings could we get if we didn't have those considerations?
So the DOD budget is like the federal budget in a microcosm. It has its own retirement problem. It has retirement benefits that it can't pay.
Own health
It's
care.
got a big own health care problem.
TRICARE.
And that's it. And then it's got some other parts of its budget that need serious reform. Like we all are pretty confident that we think we could do better in Homeland Security. That doesn't look like it's super efficient. Interior has had a history of problems. So that's true as well. And in a lot of their nuclear programs, a lot of the weapons acquisition programs, I mean, my old boss, Senator John McCain, railed about these things again and again and again, but they haven't been fixed. So now you've got this residual, the thing we actually care about, our troops and their capability of defending this nation, that are being held hostage by the rest of this stuff, and you either say, no, we're not giving you any more money, and then people play the troops card. How can you do that? Or you say, we'll give them all the money, it'll be fine. But it doesn't go there. It goes to these other things. So you need some serious reforms. You need them starting today.
All right. Doug, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. That was Doug Holtz-Eakin. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.